But what if the offence is your issue and not theirs?
Explain that.
And so, like, I could say something that's my reality, because a lot of the time we get offended by people's realities because they don't mirror ours.
True.
But that's not how the world is. The world is very complex and there are many grey areas. So a lot of people get offended by different people's realities. So if I say something that's very true for me, but it may offend you, if you tell me you're offended, I don't see that as my issue, I see that as yours.
That's yours.
You know, like, where do we draw the line between, like, opinions and people's perspectives that are offensive?
I think for me, the line has to be drawn as, opinions are fine, but something has to be rooted in factual information. If you're just spouting out things to offend, that's one thing. But if I'm saying something which may cause offense, but is rooted in some form of, research and some factual basis, then clearly my intention isn't to offend you, but it's perhaps to enlighten or educate you.
But even then, an opinion isn't factual.
This is true.
So it can be aligned with some fact, then you've now got an opinion based on a fact, and that can still be offensive.
Or you can be deliberately trying to constantly present facts that you know are hurtful to the person receiving them. Just because something's factual doesn't mean that someone has to feel comfortable with hearing it.
How you impart the knowledge is important.
How you impart your execution, and I think it's all based around the context as well. So I think for me, those are, the ways that I would go about it.
I think it has to be substantiated. I think if you have an opinion and it's based upon your own life experience, even if it's not based on facts, it's based upon things you've learned, and it doesn't have to be from any doctrine or any book, I think you can still have an opinion. I don't think I draw lines with people in general. I think for some, when people say things I don't like, I have to be accountable that I put myself in a forum where I've received that information, and if I'm not in that situation, then I remove myself from it. So it's one of those things, I don't necessarily meet people and think, you have to hold on or don't talk. I entertain and let people speak.
So you feel there are that anyone has the right to speak on any topic?
I think, that when it comes down to freedom of speech, we are only as free as the realms and restrictions we have of our own being. So, for example, I wouldn't be able to comment on I could comment on something like homosexuality, not being homosexual. Whereas someone who's homosexual could tell me, but you can't talk about that. I could talk about being black and tell a person who's not black, you can't talk about being black. It's that kind of thing.
So you're saying no then, so you can't talk on everything.
But I think you can, but I think that there will always be contention.
Yeah, I think you can talk on anything you want. It's all about how you say it and who's going to listen to you. Because I'm not necessarily going to tune into everyone's opinion who I don't necessarily think is versed on a certain subject. If I won't also get offended for them speaking on it, because you're allowed to. Whether I'm going to listen and stuff like that is a completely different matter. It's about what I do. I'm not in the habit, or I don't think it's cool to kind of tell people what they should be doing very much. I tweet a lot, but I just tweet about my thoughts, not necessarily, I don't quote people's tweets if I think it's stupid, because equally, if I saw people having a conversation, if I walked past people having a conversation and I thought they were saying dumb things, I wouldn't interject and be like, well, actually.
That's interesting.
So why would I do it online?
Would you?
I would. And I don't particularly do it anymore. And I feel like, again, being an artist, it has some kind of restraint sometimes. It's like, cool, you can represent this, but now you start talking about politics, you start talking about this, and some people really feel like this wasn't who you are. And it's really weird having an audience who think like this is who you should be all the time. Like, I wrote a poem once and it was about politics, what was happening. And someone said, like, I love all the love stuff you're doing, but like, just leave the politics to the side. And it's because like, it was like, okay, a war thing that was going on, right? And I'm like, okay, I have an opinion because there are kids dying, right? Fair enough, I'm not in that country or residence, but I know what is wrong and what is right when it comes to there's a innocent kid dying and there's a war going on. Like, this doesn't make sense to me, so I want to speak about this, right? But then for her, she was like, you don't have a right to even have an opinion on this. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I do feel like there are places that you can show your opinion and still interject, because when you don't, in some ways you're complicit. You're just happy to know that this is going on. Like, even that, I would beat myself up if I heard like a conversation going on with like racist remarks and I just walked past it. I would beat myself up for the whole day. I'm like, why not I just tell them, like, yeah, I should have said something. Like,
but you know what it is for me? I'm quite a faithful person, so I always think about myself. And I always think the first struggle we have is not dealing with the external, it's the internal. And so for me, I look at my own self and think, for me to change this conversation, if I walk into a school, for example, I walked into a brand new school and I was going to take over as head of department. These kids didn't know who I was, they didn't know where I came from. And I think I have to make that something that works for me. And so rather than me going and attacking all of those kids, I have to take them. I have to know what they're talking about. And they had conversations and they said things that were just mad inappropriate, and the girls would say things that are mad inappropriate, and I have to listen to it and humble myself. And then I present myself back to them the next day, learning from that, rather than interjecting. And because what ends up happening is kids especially, and people in general, have this, like, their combative nature. Where as soon as you challenge something that they've said, even if they know they're being told the truth about their own, words or language, they kind of get a bit defensive. So you have to kind of find a way in your own behavior to let yourself, your behavior speak.
That's
sometimes.
definitely, I want to kind of, no, you're right. You are right. I do feel like when you have an opinion, sometimes it's best to wait a day and then come back and then express it. However, in that situation, I feel like it has more like personal connotations to me because I feel like I want to speak up in places. And when I don't, and I have an opinion and I think it's valid and I shut up, like I beat myself up because of it.
But you're a poet, so I feel like when you get an opportunity to hear something like that, you can say something, but not always directly to the person. We don't have to. Sometimes we can express it. It can come out in the art. It can come out in a conversation.
But
even
I don't feel like I
you like to address the person
just by doing it in the poem because that person may never hear that poem.
Do you think that by interjecting and having the conversation that you're going to change those racist minds?
So this is the thing. I don't know if I will change their racist minds, but I know that I've now impacted them. And I've had a chance to influence them without saying nothing. I'm just saying, cool, harbor yourselves, be there, flourish. But when I interject, again, I might give them even more reason to be racist. Potentially, right? But then in my mind, it's like, okay, there are people who are racist. Some people don't know they are. I can now test these people to say, do you know you're consciously saying things that are racist now? Or do you think this is a joke? Do you know what I mean? Because I'm someone who fits into this category, who is offended, and you think this is fun, you can laugh about it. So I feel like if I leave them, that dialogue, that perspective of, let's say, black people in this situation can continue. They will pass it down to their kids, their friends, their family, their work colleagues, and that's going to continue until someone says, who's brave enough to say, I don't like that outfit.
And you don't think as adults they may have heard that somewhere in society before?
Yeah, but you're 100% right.
Yeah, I was just coming back on a different kind of coming back about 10 steps, but which was thinking about the line between people being able to speak freely and then getting offended. And sometimes for me it just becomes more about like differences in like, and it kind of comes back to the narcissism, like depends what your like social priorities are. Like sometimes I feel like we've decided that like being able to say what you think is like a bigger priority than like compassion and like caring about each other. And the example like I was thinking of is like when I grew up, like I used to ask people not to use the word spaz and retard because my brother is disabled and I'd grown up literally like being in the street with him sometimes and people calling him a spaz and a retard. So I'd say like, please can you not say that around me? And people, it would be so interesting to me that people were, and I think this kind of connects to narcissism, were more like interested in that they needed to use the word spaz than they were like, but that hurts me. And like sometimes I feel like we put like free speech on this pedestal that's like apparently our most important value, but what about actually the value of being compassionate and like being kind and not wanting to hurt other people? And I know that like that's, I'm using a very personal example where it is about hurt rather than politics and stuff, but sometimes I do think that we get caught up in this argument of like free speech being our apparently our most important value all of a sudden, but usually that only comes up when actually someone says, can you not hurt me? And it's far more difficult for people to sit in the moment of, I've hurt somebody and can I come in touch with not being defensive right now and being compassionate and thinking, why does that hurt you? Why does that make you feel upset? And responding to that on a human level, but instead it's easier to fall back on this debate that we've like become very into of like, I want to say spaz. And it's like, I just felt like, okay, well, great,
so
what do you get out of that? Like,
freedom of speech is more talked about when we're discussing like the boundaries of it and when we fall out to the restrictions of it.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you can be free, but don't offend me. Yeah. Like, you can be free in this area, like, all around the world, but, like, when you do this, you've crossed the line.
Or people want the freedom of speech. I think this came up when you talk about being listened to. People often don't necessarily want freedom of speech. What they really mean is, I want to be heard. So it's like, no one's really saying that you can't say what you want to say. I'm just saying that I'm not listening. And I have that freedom of emotional reaction as well. So often people aren't arguing about whether they have free speech or not. They're arguing about, I want to have my free speech, but then I don't want you to have the free speech back to say that you're racist. Well, I think you're racist.
That I was hurt because of what you said.
Or that I thought it was hurtful. It's like, I want free speech without negative emotional reaction.
Free speech with entitlement.
Yeah.
That's
free speech that is received well. Like, it's like, well.
But this is the thing, like with social media now, I feel like there's a surveillance. Because now, you know, when you say something, your thousands of followers are going to start having opinions of what you think. Yeah. And they have the right now to critique you. Because they feel like this is in my feed, I'm following, even though their decision was to follow you and see what you're talking about, is that I can pick that apart now. Like, how many people sent you, like, DM said you spelled that wrong?
I don't spell things.
Do you know what I mean? I do all the time, right? And I was like, you felt to pick me up on this, but you can critique this, so I can critique your opinions, I can critique your sexuality, I can critique your relationship. Yeah. They feel the entitlement based on that free speech, because Twitter has empowered everyone. Some people don't feel empowered through Twitter, some people actually feel like restrains them in some ways, because you have limited characters, you have to make sure they read the rest of the thread. So you can get construed by seeing one part of a thread and now you're this, because you haven't seen the contextual setup or strat, I can't even think of the word I'm trying to say, but you haven't seen the contextual narrative of where that fits in or where that makes sense. So in some ways, yeah, like there is a hierarchy, because if someone is being retweeted because of what they said to 100,000 people, it's seen as valid. Even if it's the most, obnoxious thing ever, people are saying there must be some truth behind this because everyone's retweeting this and it makes some sense.
But I think that's in the minds of us, though. You know, I don't necessarily believe that at all, because I think someone could have 1 million followers and say something. I don't necessarily take that as truth. That's my own.
But it's the influence behind it.
But even then, I could, for example, I remember being like the biggest Michael Jackson fan growing up. And all of this stuff is said about him, and he comes out and says some stuff too, and it's all in the news and it's all in the media, and I look at that and think, well, I just love your music, innit? So all of that stuff, I don't really know. I wasn't in your bedroom, I went in your house, I went in Neverland, I ain't never been. So therefore, all of that is your business. I don't really know what happened there, and I still believe I was always a fan. So like, I always chose what to take from anything. So if I go on something and someone tweets something that's not valid or I don't think is appropriate, I'm not gonna believe there's any validity in it because someone else says there is. Or because
So
like,
what if someone said
10,000
it themselves though?
Yeah.
How do you mean? So
you're saying if someone says something that you follow, and they say something that you deem offensive?
No, not offensive. You just said he doesn't believe.
Oh, that you don't believe?
Yeah.
Okay.
If someone said something offensive, of course, like I can take that and say, no, that's ridiculous. But I just think that we have a choice in this, and I think with that,
I don't like that selective nature, honestly. I feel like if you are offended by someone's opinion, regardless if you like them or not, like saying something makes a difference. I personally feel that.
But what if the offence is your issue and not theirs?
Explain that.
And so, like, I could say something that's my reality, because a lot of the time we get offended by people's realities because they don't mirror ours.
True.
But that's not how the world is. The world is very complex and there are many grey areas. So a lot of people get offended by different people's realities. So if I say something that's very true for me, but it may offend you, if you tell me you're offended, I don't see that as my issue, I see that as yours.
That's your issue.
Personally,
I hear you.
Personally, for me, I don't allow myself to get offended by anyone I don't intellectually respect, because otherwise I'd be constantly enraged. You know, and I think that you have to be able to be selective about who you take offense from. I have to value you as a person. I have to know your intentions. I have to know your heart before I can get in. So I have to know your heart and things like that before I can get offended. If I walk out the street and some person I don't know calls me the N-word, he screams the N-word, that's a major reflection of him. Nothing to do with me. Right. I don't need to go and talk to him. That's just exerting energy that I don't need. He's committed to that stance because he said it to a stranger. So he's probably had those beliefs for quite some time.
Yep.
So I'm gonna leave that. That doesn't affect me. It's not me. That's very much yourself.
And I feel like that's saying a lot about me as well as a person. I feel like this is therapy right now. Like, I personally feel like I need to listen to, I'm very sensitive to how people feel in general, right? And I think that's because coming from a place where like, I felt like my community wasn't sensitive to how I felt coming up. I'm now going to be sensitive to how I feel for other people too, because some people don't speak up when they're hurt or when they're offended. So
Yeah, I mean, I just cried when that happened to me. When someone, I was just like,
No, but I would have at one stage. I would have at one stage, and that's growth. Again, you know what I mean? It's by, if you can't change other people, all you can do is change your response to them.
It is growth, because I've been through a transitional period in my life as well, where when people have come out and used maybe racial slurs or remarks to me, my first response would be I need to rebuke you, I need to chastise you and tell you about yourself. But I think where in my growth, what we're talking about, where I am now, it's kind of like, can I actually change their narrative? Can I change their viewpoints? And I feel like the burden wasn't necessarily at first, I felt like I have to do this thing to tell them, but now I feel like I have to change myself. So I don't necessarily walk around reprimanding people all the time. So I just feel like in order for me to grow and excel, we do live in this complex world. People are gonna have their opinions. And like what you said, if I don't necessarily know you or respect you, why does it have to hurt me anyway? Because I know who I am, and I'm rooted in my identity and what I stand for. So to me, that is now what actually matters, more so than just making sure that someone can be swayed to how I think.
okay, so devil's advocate, right? So you're in a queue to go cinema. Someone says something that is offensive to you. You don't know them. You have no personal relationship with them, right? But you hear it and it's offensive to you, right? Do you say anything or you go about your business?
Wow.
In that situation, I understand that someone's trying to be deliberately inflammatory. You want a reaction. You know what I mean? You're being
drawn out.
Yeah, you're being purposely antagonizing. And in that situation, like, again, I won't necessarily give them the offense. It won't be the offense of, oh wow, you said that about me. It's gonna be like, why are you being I might attack them or critique them on what are you trying to do? That's really embarrassing and cringe. I don't know you. You know what I mean? But the statement itself, that's throwaway to me.
I feel that sometimes when we confront people with a rebuttal, sometimes it can further solidify their opinion as well. Yeah. And I felt that oftentimes because I used to be quite aggressive back in the day, I felt that it done that. And when I took the higher, moral code, I felt that they can walk away from that thinking, wow, that person didn't respond the way that I anticipated them to do.
Yeah.
It is more embarrassing for them, and it can change their way of thinking.
Sometimes, but there are some people just listen to you and be like, okay, yeah, you didn't say anything, you're an idiot.
But then
right?
Then is that on? Should I take that on myself, or is that for them to deal with? Like, because that can go back to an ego thing.
Yeah,
it's an ego.
I feel I'm ego. Listen, my ego is clearly sensitive.
See, I understand where you're coming from, as if to say, wow, I didn't stand up for myself. What? How can you say that to me? And I agree with that.
Not even if it's said to you, it's said knowing that you're there, you're behind me, but you're like someone saying, oh, cool, like, look at your crep, so da-da-da-da-da. Like, they know they're saying something deliberately offensive, and it's their opinion, right? Because there's a lot of people, oh, you look different, I'm gonna say something about you, right? Yeah. It happens all the time in Camden, right?
Yeah.
But I look at I look at that as irrational behavior, so I don't necessarily address that. I look at that as the same person walking down the street who's just drunk and slurring. I just look at it like that. I look at it in the same vein. I don't think, even the only time I would intervene is if someone said something offensive and someone else who was part of the group to be offended was visibly hurt. And if I say, for example, I remember being in a situation where I see a Muslim woman wearing a hijab and a guy's talking about it. I see her get offended, so I step in. Yeah, that's the time. Before that, I'm not gonna consider it, because I just think I leave crazy people to be crazy.
I almost actually sometimes think that I feel more inclined to step in when it is something that doesn't apply to me. So in a situation like that, sometimes I would feel more inclined to say something, because I feel like you can use your privilege of not being on the receiving end of the offence to actually support someone who might not be able to say something. Sometimes that is more where I would.
Yeah, I would need that as well, because if I'm super sensitive. So if something is said around me, again, I might not say something, but I will definitely 100% want to say something in that situation. Yeah. And I might even honestly look down on myself if I don't say something at that time. I'd actually be pissed off with myself.
But then you can also be sensitive to know. You can also be sensitive enough to know that that person is probably suffering. And it doesn't, because most people who have those types of opinions and have those types of compulsions to want to just be aggressive to someone they don't know, that person is in pain, something. And that doesn't mean you have to take it on and entertain it at all, or condone it. Not at all. I'm not saying be a pushover in that sense, but you can also extend your sensitivity to understanding that that person is going through things.
Exactly, and that's where you can bring in a bit of a more kind of complex understanding of like compassion. Right. So the time when I was called the N-word in the street and I was outside the person's where they lived, and my perception was, okay, this person's probably got a community mental health team. I reported it to the police because I wanted the statistics to be recorded in the rising number of like hate crime. But actually, when I spoke to the police, I said to them, like, at the time I was working in mental health, and I was like, I'm working in mental health, like you do with a lot of disinhibited people that express racist views. Well, often they're not sure if they really believe them or not, but they're saying them. And so my feedback to the police was, I know that there's times when this kind of behaviour, where they're verbally abusing people in the street, might be indicative of where their mental health is or what might happen next. So I was like, I don't want to press charges. What I want is to be reassured that you've looked into whether he has a mental health team and therefore made connections and, you know, pass this information back. And then that's what happened. And I chased up with the police and we spoke over the next couple of weeks and they confirmed that he did have a mental health team. And do you know what I mean? Like, you can have a more nuanced response that includes compassion sometimes.
And so that delayed response, because she could have been reactionary and just, you know, completely attacked him. Yeah. But that delayed response of, okay, I'm going to add to the statistics so we can all be informed. From that action, we're now all more informed. You know what I mean? We have a statistic that comes directly from her delayed response and thinking about it, which is probably a lot more beneficial than her attacking him. Because what would have happened there? We can't record anything. Yeah. She knows nothing about him, and
it's beneficial to both.
Do we think that the passive response is always the way to go?
I wouldn't call that passive. I would call that considered. I would call that considered.
And I cried in the moment.
When we're talking talking about hierarchy of free speech, it isn't necessarily in those people that we would call social justice warriors who we don't believe their opinions, who have stuff like that. Right. It is Katie Hopkins who's on TV. It is Piers Morgan who's got his own show. It is people like Donald Trump. It's actually not those people on the internet. They don't actually have any power. They may have a few followers, but try and get some of the people that you can't stand the most, or you think have the biggest followers and the worst opinions. Try and get them to get a slot like Piers Morgan has. Not just to show up on This Morning, because some of those guys are showing up on This Morning now, but have a slot. You know what I mean? Like a slot in the building. Do you know what I mean? Those are the people with the hierarchy opinion. It's still with the elite.